Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to read to you all of Chapter 10 from my book, Seven Sisters, The Voyage. Just before daylight, President Sloan and Palmer stood outside the captain's cabin along with President Tippett and chatted quietly about how the wind had picked up and the fog was thankfully lifting. They were trying not to think about the flogging of Titus, which was going to take place in the next few minutes. They were grateful they didn't have to witness it like the crew and President Bramwell were required to do. Their job was to stand by the hatchways and make sure no one came up to view the punishment being inflicted at the mizzenmast. The crew was lined up to witness the punishment so they would learn from Titus's mistake. Some had witnessed floggings before, and some bore the scars from their own lessons learned. Everyone was dreading the gruesome business. The priesthood leaders, of course, didn't have any idea how they would feel about the actual flogging until they heard the first stripe land on Titus's back and the excruciating cry that followed. It stabbed them in their stomachs and made them flinch. The crew watched with expressionless faces. The next stripe brought an even louder yell and some profane cursing from Titus. President Palmer's face drained. He quickly moved to the bulwark, but didn't make it in time before throwing up on the deck. He now knew he wouldn't last the full 15 lashes. "I'm sorry, brethren. I've got to go below," he said, as he quickly raced toward the hatchway stairs. Sloan and Tippett were also feeling queasy in their stomachs, but were farther away from the punishment than Palmer had been. They covered their ears to avoid hearing the full volume of the cat-o'-nine tails as it landed on Titus's back, time after time. President Tippett hummed a hymn to block out the horrible sounds. It seemed more like 100 lashes than 15. Finally, the crack and cries ceased. As a groaning Titus was taken below, the priesthood leaders consulted with President Bramwell, whose face was white as one of the icebergs in the distance. Captain Hudson was also visibly shaken. "I'm sorry that had to occur, President," the captain said. "You can rest assured that Titus will be confined to lockup for the rest of the voyage, barring any unexpected emergencies." "Captain, I appreciate your disciplining Titus," said President Bramwell. "I know it was harder on you than anyone else." The saints were very glad to be back on deck now that the persistent clanging of the fog bell, without the persistent clanging of the fog bell to annoy them. They were able to resume their normal activities after the fog had been so limiting, and now they were actually able to see who they were talking to, and mothers could tend and watch their children play on deck. The saints began to long for the sun to shine its comforting warm rays on them once again. It was still cold on deck, but the fresh ocean air was something everyone craved every morning after a night in the crowded, stuffy decks below. It was not general knowledge among the saints what had happened to Eleanor. The sisters had told the ward caregivers, who were under Eleanor's supervision, that she was sick and that they would be taking care of her for a day or two. All through the night, the sisters took turns watching her as she slept. From time to time, she would thrash about, yelling and flinging her arms. Whoever was watching her would wrestle her arms back down under the covers until she became quiet again. She slept, albeit fitfully, until almost noon the next day. When she finally opened her eyes and saw her sister standing around her berth, the memory of the night before came flooding back to her, and she turned her head away and began to sob, ashamed of what had happened to her. "We're here for you, Eleanor," soothed Caroline. "You'll be all right." Eleanor had a good cry for a minute or so, and then, as though nothing had happened, she attempted to get out of her berth. "Well, that's enough crying," she said. "I need to tend to my nursing." Oh, no, you don't," said Lizzie, pushing her back down in the berth. "You are taking the day off so you can rest." "But my patients—" "We've taken care of that," assured Susanna. Even though Eleanor looked like she might be able to carry on her normal duties, every muscle in her body was racked with pain when she tried to get out of bed. The sisters could see that she was highly emotional and disjointed in her thinking. This was evident when she would suddenly sit up and frantically look around. "Where's Titus?" she would say, with fear in her voice as she drew her bed covers up to her chin. Caroline touched her shoulder. "He's in irons for the rest of the voyage." "And he got 15 lashes this morning," Lavinia added. The sisters waited to see Eleanor's reaction. Tears filled her eyes again, and she covered her mouth to suppress her weeping. After a few sobs, she smiled at the sisters and reached out to touch them. Gradually, her countenance changed from terror-stricken to serene with the realization that Titus would no longer be a danger to her or anyone else on the voyage. The sisters were all hugging and sniveling when President Tippett entered the room with a steaming bowl in his hand. "Here's some chicken soup the captain sent down to you, Sister Wise. He had the steward make it up from his private live store." Phoebe and Fanny plopped all the pillows behind Eleanor so she could sit up. The soup was welcome and delicious. Eleanor spent the rest of the day napping and chatting with her sisters. She seemed to be on her way to recovery. Darkness came early that evening because of heavy cloud cover, so the saints retreated below to enjoy their suppers and their various prayer meetings. Eleanor was feeling much better emotionally and desired to attend her ward prayer meeting. The process of getting her out of her night clothes and into a dress was painful. It took twice as long as it normally did, but she insisted that the meeting was just what she needed and that she would have the strength to last the entire time. Prayer meetings always lifted everyone's spirits. The speakers were especially good this evening as they talked about Zion, established in the tops of the Rocky Mountains. Salt Lake Valley was painted as a sanctuary for the persecution, where the saints could live in peace and worship as they desired. The saints all had dreams and ideas of what they thought Zion would be like. Their leaders tried to keep things in perspective and reminded them often, "Don't let your expectation exceed your realization." After the prayer meetings that evening, the first set of guards went up on deck under the direction of Captain Larkin. The cloud covering blocked any light from the moon and stars, and with only a few lanterns around the deck, it was very hard to see. The guards performed their beginning ritual of commands and salutes, and then marched to their positions to begin patrolling back and forth around the deck. The crew was climbing up and down ratlines and securing the lines and sails. They almost had the ship ready for the night. The captain, standing next to Griswold on the helm, smoked his pipe contentedly as he peered into the blackness. Periodically, he would turn and give a command to Mr. Huntley. Then the captain spotted President Bramwell coming up the hatchway. He lightly tapped his pipe over the side of the ship and put it inside his coat. "Captain Hudson, how is our progress?" Bramwell said as he approached him. "We've been trying to outrun a squall all day," Hudson said, "and the glass is dropping, which means it might intensify into a serious storm." President Bramwell grew worried. "Can we change course to miss it?" "I'm contemplating that, but it's so overcast tonight that it's hard to get an observation from the stars. It's like we're in a black sack. I'm hoping when morning breaks we can get a better look at the storm activity and set our course accordingly." Captain Larkin marched to the front of the ship with his rifle resting on his right shoulder. He stopped and took his gun ceremoniously down to the deck with a loud thump. It felt good to have the heavy rifle off his shoulder for a few seconds. He tapped the deck twice with the rifle butt and brought it back up to its diagonal home, then over to his left shoulder. He was now prepared to pivot around and start patrolling in the other direction. Before he could make this precise movement, something caught his eye, a faint light in the distance. He lowered his rifle and stared. Then he pointed and yelled loudly, "Captain, what is that?" Captain Hudson looked hard where Elijah was pointing. Then, before President Bramwell had time to question him, Hudson sprang to the wheelhouse and knocked Griswold away from the helm with such force that Griswold sprawled to the deck and slammed his head into the sideboard. Hudson grabbed the helm and turned it with surprising speed as he barked orders in piercing tones to Mr. Huntley, who repeated them. "'Bout ship! Sound the horn! There's a ship dead ahead!" Simultaneously, the panicked sailors sprang to their posts and worked frantically to shift the sails. The Amazon began to turn starboard with ear-splitting squeaks and groans louder than anyone had ever heard before. There were screams heard from below as the saints who were standing up were jolted over, and those lying in their berths were dumped onto the floor. Bramwell and the guards on deck were thrown off balance with the careening ship and had to steady themselves by grabbing whatever they were knocked into. As the Amazon turned, everyone could see a huge ship coming into full view, plowing towards them out of the dark. "Captain," Alfie screamed, "we're going to collide!" The Amazon continued to turn. Bells were clanging. Men were yelling. The other ship was heading straight for them. "Can't they see us?" yelled Griswold. Then, miraculously, the approaching ship turned away from the Amazon to the larboard side. The captain barked more orders, and the crew responded within seconds. There was screaming and crying below as the passengers questioned what was going on. President Tippett took charge. "Stay calm, everyone. Heads of families, check for injuries. I'll go up and see why the ship is reeling. You'd best lash yourselves to your berths." Tippett staggered up the hatchway, not knowing what to expect when he got topside. He spotted President Bramwell near the entrance. Even in the faint light, he could see that Bramwell was pale as skim milk. "President," he questioned. Bramwell leaned on him. "President Tippett, Captain Hudson just saved us all from shipwreck." Brother Larkin spotted a light in the distance. "And if the captain hadn't had his wits about him, we'd have been smashed to bits by that ship," he said, pointing into the murky darkness. "Can you see it?" Tippett turned just in time to see the last few feet of the unknown ship slide past the Amazon. "Yes, I can see it," he said, as a wave of nausea swept over him. The captain tied the helm off and went to retrieve Griswold from the deck, where he was mopping blood from his forehead with his handkerchief. "Griswold, I apologize for knocking you off your feet." Griswold grinned at Hudson, helped him up. Griswold grinned as Hudson helped him up. "I'm thanking St. Christopher you acted," he said, "because I don't think I'd have had the mind to do what you did. Can you handle the wheel now, or do you need a relief?" "I can handle it, Captain. I'll be privileged to handle it." With that, the captain walked over to President Bramwell, who was bent over with his hands on his knees, head down, to keep from fainting. With all casualness, he said, "I'm sorry I had to interrupt our conversation, President." President Bramwell chuckled, but was clearly shaken. "That was astonishing," he said. "I cannot express enough gratitude for your quick thinking in the face of certain calamity. You and Brother Larkin have saved the lives of all on board tonight. Everyone is indebted to you both." The captain turned to everyone assembled around him. "Men, I have a special request to make of all who witnessed this near collision tonight." Everyone stepped closer. "Please, not a word to the passengers about the danger we just went through." "But they'll want to thank you," said Bramwell. "The knowledge of what has just occurred would only cause uneasy feelings among the passengers. I want them to feel safe and secure under our care." "I agree," said Larkin. President Bramwell realized this was a wise choice. "We will respect both your wishes," he said as he shook their hands. Then he turned to the men on deck. "Do you all agree, men?" Without hesitation, the crew and guards yelled a solid "Aye." As Tippett returned to his ward, Sister Nightingale inquired breathlessly, "President Tippett, what was it?" Everyone was eager to hear. Elder Tippett moved to the center of the room. "Please, brothers and sisters, don't worry any of you. It was just the helmsman gone to sleep at the wheel." The storm clouds in the distance the evening before were closer the next morning, and the choppy ocean had turned into a powerful rolling mounds. Captain Hudson consulted with Mr. Huntley about the best setting to follow. "If we sail west by north, we might be able to skirt the storm," Huntley suggested. Hudson took his advice. "Steer west by north," he said, and Mr. Huntley repeated the command. "West by north it is, sir," said Jabez, who was now at the helm. With this new course setting, the sailors worked rapidly to change the sails. It was raining on deck, but it wasn't enough to deter the few saints who wanted to see for themselves what was causing the ship to bound up and down. They studied the storm in the distance and watched the crew attack the sails. It was a wonder to them how the ocean could change so much overnight. Phoebe and Fanny were bundled up and enjoying the ride on their ropes, when Griswold, who had been given the command from the captain, grabbed the blowhorn and yelled, "Everyone below deck! The wind ahead is blowing a gale." The saints on deck hurried below, holding on to anything they could because the ship's movements were so unpredictable. Fanny heard Griswold's order, but it didn't register with Phoebe. Her mind was on an impressive sight in the distance. "Look way over there, Fanny. That dark cloud is coming down to the water in a thin, twisty shape." Promptly forgetting Griswold's order, Fanny fastened her eyes on the funnel. And the water is twisting up to meet the clouds, she said, pointing. That is beautiful, exclaimed Phoebe in childlike wonder. I didn't believe Mr. Huntley when he told us about water spouts in class. Fanny watched for a few more moments and then saw another attraction. Oh, look at that wave! It's mountains high! They were so absorbed in the show that they didn't notice that Griswold walked up behind them, bent over, and shouted full force into his horn, All children below! The twins jumped and screamed at this cruelly delivered announcement. But when they realized what had happened, they giggled nervously with relief as they scrambled off their ropes. Phoebe tried to pacify Griswold. Yes, sir, we're on our way. Fanny hesitated. Then, pushing reason aside, she decided to make adult conversation. Mr. Griswold, isn't it dangerous the way the ship is rolling? Griswold didn't have time for chat, so he boomed. Yeah, and if this keeps up for 24 hours, the dogfish will be eating you. The twins got the message this time, and with a frenzy of screams, they ran for the hatchway. Strike the mainsail quick as you like, Mr. Huntley, stated the captain, and set the storm jibs and double-reefed mizzen. This is going to be a hard blow. Mr. Huntley repeated the orders with urgency, and the crew jumped to the challenge. After consulting with the captain, President Bramwell realized he needed to inform his flock of the dangers that lay ahead, so he called an all-company prayer meeting on the second deck. It took a while for the saints to gather. Several from each ward didn't attend because they were already in bed with seasickness or were caring for stricken family members. Brothers and sisters, we have encountered a few squalls on this voyage thus far, President Bramwell began, but the captain tells me that his glass indicates that we are on the edge of a diabolical storm. He is trying to avoid it, but as you can see and feel, the storm is worsening, and the ocean is getting very rough. I can see by your faces that many of you are, as Captain Hudson puts it, getting a little green around the gills again. We may be in for a real ordeal in the next few days. You're going to have faith and put your trust in our Heavenly Father. Be sure to lash everything down, including yourselves, to your berths. Please try to stay calm for the duration of the storm. Your panic will only make things worse for the children. Do you remember when the Savior was on the ship during the terrible storm on the Sea of Galilee? His disciples were afraid for their lives. They woke him up saying, Master, the tempest is raging. Let us sing that stirring hymn tonight, brothers and sisters. Brother Careless stepped to the front and struck the downbeat. The saints sang the hymn as they held on to their seats. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave from the angry deep? The ship was heaving and rolling as the saints sang, some with faith and some with fear in their hearts. The crew worked frantically as the storm overtook the ship and waves crashed over the deck. The song continued as Griswold made his way to the brig below, where Titus was locked up. He looked through the bars on the little window of the brig and greeted Titus as he unlocked the door. Good news, chum. The captain needs every hand on deck. We're dealing with a real widowmaker. Titus's heart was pumping as Griswold unlocked his irons. I was wondering what was keeping him. He knows this is my kind of weather. Griswold grinned as Titus put on the oilskin he had brought him. When he arrived topside, the crew greeted Titus with handshakes and yee-hoes. They needed his brawn to help with the difficult night ahead. Below, the saints were just starting the third verse of their hymn. On deck, Jabez turned to Griswold. I am astounded at the nonchalance of these people in such peril. Jabez rolled his eyes. They all should be locked up in an asylum. The wind and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons, or men, or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and skies. They were now at the climax of the hymn and found themselves praying along with the remaining words. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. Then, just as if cued by Brother Careless, a wave came crashing down the rear hatchway and splashed through the door on the words, Be still, getting the last 3 rows of saints sopping wet. At that instant, the wet saints screamed but immediately began laughing at the unexpected cold bath they had received. This broke the tension, and the saints temporarily forgot the danger they were in. However, the closing prayer brought them back to the certainty of their dangerous situation as Brother Dibble pleaded with the Lord for their safety. Upon dismissal, the saints didn't stay to visit with each other like they normally did after prayer meetings. They hustled to get their families and themselves into their berths and lashed down. Moans could be heard from the already seasick saints. Batten down the hatches, Mr. Huntley. This was the command the captain hoped he wouldn't have to give, but the storm had doubled in strength and fury, and it was now necessary. Several men surrounded each of the 4 hatchways and stretched canvas over the tops. They then took wooden slats and wedged them in around the sides of each canvas to secure it in place. This would keep water from flooding the decks below. Just before the canvas that Titus was working on was totally secure, he stuck his face into the opening and bellowed down to the saints, Hear, hear, all ye Mormons! The ship is sinking, and we're all going to hell together! Then with peals of laughter he roared like a demon as he put the remaining slats into their grooves. Ha 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 ha! The women and children screamed in panic at the thought of the ship sinking and them being battened down. It was as though they were encased in their own tomb. They should have left Titus in irons, protested Brother Proctor. President Tippett tried to pacify everyone. They needed every able-bodied sailor to help during the storm. How can anyone be so spiteful, said Sister Walmsley in tears. Brothers and sisters, please don't worry yourselves, comforted President Tippett. The ship is not sinking. Upon hearing Titus's familiar voice, Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat and it began pounding. She started breathing rapidly and looked around for an escape route. She was next to Lizzie in her berth, but locked arms with Eleanor and assured her that Titus would be returning to the brig after the storm. As the storm grew more violent, the saints found that being lashed to their berths was the only way to stay in their beds. When they hit a breaker, the ship tipped so far one way that they were almost standing up, yet still lying in their berths. Next, their heads were down. Then they lunged from side to side, rolling towards their bunkmates, with only their lashings holding them in place. The saints cried and prayed as the water flew down the ventilators. The ship trembled in every timber, and the lanterns swung, twisted, and squeaked. Buckets, grips, pans, cooking utensils, trunks, boxes, tubs, cans, pots, and valises skated back and forth across the floor. There was crying, screaming, and retching to the point that many of the saints plugged their ears or covered their heads with their pillows. This is the highest hell I ever was in or ever wished to be, Lizzie cried. Oh dear, what a night this is going to be, Lavinia grieved. Phoebe was terrified. Susanna, it sounds like the ship is breaking apart. Susanna comforted her, but wasn't completely convinced of her own words. No, sweetheart, we'll be all right. I want Mummy, Fanny blubbered. My head is swimming, moaned Lizzie as she held her head with both hands. My stomach is spinning, said Caroline. Eleanor turned to Lavinia. Lavinia, sing something. Lavinia wondered if she could, as she began. Jesus, Savior, pilot me over life's tempestuous sea. Boisterous waves obey thy will. When thou sayest to them, be still. Wondrous sovereign of the sea, Jesus, Savior, pilot me. During her song, the sisters felt a little more calm, and much to Susanna's surprise, Phoebe and Fanny dropped off to sleep. Some of the nearby saints hummed along with Lavinia as she sang the second and third verses. On deck, there was chaos. Jabez had been lashed to the helm, so the waves wouldn't sweep him over the side, and the crew was frantically taking sails in one by one as they started to tear. Alfie had been ordered to check the hold for any damage, and when he arrived back on deck through the last hatchway to be wedged shut, he made his way to the captain. "Captain, we've sprung a leak. The hold has 10 inches and is rising." "Man the pumps, Mr. Huntley," the captain ordered. Huntley repeated his instructions as several sailors leaped to the pumps. "This is the worst storm I've been in 25 years on the Atlantic," the captain shouted into Huntley's ear. "Make that 30 for me, Captain," Huntley yelled back. The storm was growing in strength, and the sound of the waves crashing over the deck was like thunderclaps. Alfie let go of the railing he was holding for a second and was hit by a wave that threw him to the other side of the deck, gashing his head on the bulwark. He luckily grabbed some nearby lines to keep from being swept over the side. Jabe was getting tired. He had wrestled the helm for over 7 hours. "Captain, I can't hold the helm. She's getting away from me." "Griswold, help Jabez," the captain ordered, and the two tugged at the wheel to try to bring it back on course. As they struggled to hold it, the tiller rope suddenly broke, throwing them both down. There was screaming below deck when the ship suddenly jerked in the other direction, knocking people off their feet or jerking them violently sideways. Jabez staggered up and grabbed the helm. It just spun in circles, no longer attached to anything. "Captain, the tiller rope's parted," he shouted. "The helm is useless." Griswold shouted, "We're dead in the water, Captain." "Damn the weather, damn the ship, and damn the luck," the captain cursed. Then he pondered for a few seconds what he should do. "Mr. Huntley, stream all the hawsers you can, and see if you can rig the sea anchor. We must not let her broach, or she'll never stand up again." "Stream the hawsers, rig the anchor," reiterated Huntley to the crew. "Open this hatch, men," said the captain. "Bring a lantern, Titus, and come with me." 2 sailors pried the wedges out and opened the hatch. Then the captain and Titus went down the stairs. As they stepped into the sleeping quarters, suddenly the captain asked the terrified and sickly saints, "Where's President Bramwell? I need to speak to him." Bramwell rolled off his berth and made his way to the captain, who pulled him away from the others into the stairwell. The captain took a deep breath and conveyed the bad news. "President Bramwell, I'll be direct with you. The steering's gone, and such sails as we still have set are blowing out one by one. The sheets and halyards are snapping like threads. The foretop mast's gone by the board, and the other masts are likely to follow. I have done all in my power, but this is the worst gale I've ever known since I've been master of a ship. If the God of the Mormons can do anything to save this ship and its people, you had better call on him to do so, for we are sinking at the rate of 1 foot an hour. If the storm continues, we will all be at the bottom of the ocean before daybreak." As he took in this information, Bramwell searched Hudson's face. Hudson was deadly serious. With a grave look, Bramwell announced, "I'll call my leaders together." With that, President Bramwell moved among the berths, rousing the presidents of each ward. They in turn roused the presidents on the deck below and told them all to meet in the cooking galley. Titus held his lantern high as he led the way for the captain to enter the stairwell. As they climbed the stairs, Titus stopped and turned. "One question, Captain. Why are you getting Bramwell's hope up? Praying for the wind to change is useless." I know, but I had to prepare him for what will happen to his people." Titus understood, but continued to mock. "If this prayer thing works, even I'll have to believe in Mormon miracles." The captain laughed. "You know, I've been listening to their sermons, and it's Christianity, not Mormonism they've been preaching." "I think you've nailed it on the head, Cap," said Titus. The captain got serious again. "Titus, we'll keep the pumps going with shifts every hour. The rest of the crew needs to get below and hang on. There's nothing more we can do." "That's bad news, Cap," Titus said, realizing the gravity of the situation. Then starting up the stairs, he said, "I've been on deck for 26 hours. I think it's time to drink that bottle of rum I've been saving and get bogged out of my mind." "Titus," Captain Hudson called. Titus stopped and turned. "Despite our differences, you've been a good sailor." Titus nodded in acceptance and quickly turned so the captain couldn't see the emotion entering his face. In the meantime, President Bramwell headed for the galley with his 2 counselors and the 15 ward presidents. When they all arrived, they stood in a circle around the stove, which took up most of the room in the galley. It had been out of fire for almost 2 days because of the storm, so the men were able to hold on to it to steady themselves. "Brethren, The captain just told me the ship's helm has parted from the tiller rope, and the ship is at the mercy of the storm. He said I should prepare the saints for the worst. The men's faces registered the impending doom. But I'm sorry, I can't do that, he continued. I'm asking all of you to exercise your faith as you've never exercised it before, and join me in prayer as I lead our supplication to the Lord. The men knelt down. In the sailors' quarters, the crew members were in their hammocks, tied to the inner hull. The hammocks were surprisingly steady as the ship dipped in every direction. The sailors were bitter as they cursed the storm and nursed on rum to await their fate. The captain stayed on deck to assist the crew members at the pumps. He couldn't bear to retreat to his cabin and go down without a fight. The waves splashed over the side of the ship from every direction. Then, in the distance, the captain saw a huge wave mounting. Instead of breaking and diminishing, it just kept rising. The captain was paralyzed with fear as it grew and grew. He finally got his words out. "Cor blimey, get below, men!" The crew scattered. In the galley, President Bramwell began his prayer. "O God, the eternal Father, maker of the heavens, the earth, and the ocean, we come before thee to ask thee to spare this ship and the lives of hundreds of thy faithful and humble servants who are on board." A huge vertical wall of water mounted until it could rise no longer. It finally broke, causing the ship to run downhill on the face of it. Down, down it slid until the wave caused the ship to slew to the left and gradually but helplessly lie down on her side. The saints and the sailors screamed as they felt the ship pass the point of no return. They were thrown off their berths and hammocks and dangled over the sides, held only by their lashings. Everything not tied down tumbled like apples in a rolling barrel. The priesthood leaders were also thrown down by the floundering ship and rolled into each other as they scrambled to hang on to anything they slid past. Water came in everywhere, and the lanterns fell one by one, catching bedding and clothing on fire. The flying water, however, quickly extinguished anything that was burning. The saints soon found themselves in total darkness as they screamed in terror. President Bramwell gathered his wits and continued to supplicate the Lord. "By the power of the holy Melchizedek priesthood which we hold, we pray for the winds to cease, for the storm to quiet, and for the waters to calm." The ship was now on its side, filling with water, and nothing, it seemed, could save her. Then the hawsers and the sea anchor, which were trailing behind the ship, suddenly began to pull against the waves. They became taut and forceful, as if there were 1,000 men pulling the ship in the opposite direction. To help matters, a couple of contrary waves hit the ship, 1, 2, and the ship slowly but surely staggered in a most improbable fashion. Everyone felt the sudden shift as the ship creaked, groaned, and screeched, uprighting itself and causing them all to be thrown back in the other direction. The leaders scrambled to regain their footings as